Speaker.
Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Labor is supporting this bill to the Finance and Expenditure Committee, and that is what we want to see. We do want to see a very strong banking sector. It is fundamental to our economy, and it's also a fact of life that our banking sector is dominated by the four major Australian-owned banks. They hold more than 90% of the banking transaction market. It is to their credit, to those Australian-owned banks, that we have seen over the last few years, I suppose, more restrained lending in our nation than in other parts of the world. If you refer to Ireland currently, where the banking sector is at the heart of the financial collapse, leading to savage public funding cuts and a rescue package led by the European Union. But the Australian-owned banks are not all covered in glory. Of course, we have a number of sectors here where there has been lending beyond what was appropriate, and there's also been some fairly strong views that those Australian-owned banks, including Westpac, were riding interest rates, perhaps are still riding interest rates in the wake of the losses they've sustained in the face of the global financial meltdown. And that's why it was important that the Australian-owned banks, including Westpac, should have supported the Labor Greens inquiry into the banking sector, an inquiry which was only set up because the government refused to have a wider official section review of the banking sector. And as we know, Westpac did not support that review, nor did any of its colleague banks from the Australian-owned banks. We don't hold that against Westpac, but it was something that they might give further thought to in terms of any future such reviews. I would like to comment also on the issue of the Chief Executive's salary, because I think, frankly, it is unacceptable to see a Chief Executive of any institution, be it public or privately owned, when we are in still the toughest economic times in a generation, for a Chief Executive's pay package to be worth more than 100 times the value, the cost, the income of some of the staff he is representing. That has got to an extraordinary disparity between what ordinary workers are receiving and what somebody, when all due credit is paid, still is earning a very, very high salary package. And when we consider that the average Westpac customer support worker is earning from around $45,000, and that's 124th of the package that the Westpac Chief Executive is receiving, there is a huge, huge disparity. And it brings to mind around the world that there are questions starting to be asked about these issues of pay equity. In Britain, the Tory government, the new David Cameron-led government, has in fact established a review of pay equity led by none other than a fellow called Will Hutton, who's a staunch Labor supporter, well-known commentator and journalist. That review is going through some of the issues which have seen these kind of extortionate salary levels paid to senior public figures and the disparity between those and ordinary people earning ordinary incomes. And that review is getting very wide support from some surprising figures, one of them being Michael Portillo, the former Thatcherite cabinet minister, who has acknowledged that when they set in place some of the market reforms under the Thatcher administration, there was an expectation that the private sector would show some restraint, that the gap between those on the top and those on the bottom and those on the middle would not grow and grow and grow. And unfortunately, that is what we saw in Britain. That's what we see in New Zealand today. We are supporting the Select Committee review. This bill going to the Select Committee for further review. It is appropriate. We are supporting this legislation, but we do so in a spirit which says, Westpac Chief Executive, you do need to consider the equity involved in your salary package. There are issues involved there as far as many New Zealanders are concerned, and ultimately the customer is right. Ultimately, those sorts of issues can have an impact upon those choices that consumers have in the market. And I would note that other bank chief executive salary packages are around half the level or thereabouts of that enjoyed by the Westpac Chief Executive. I'd like to just comment very briefly on one other issue, In respect of Westpac, its call centre, one of its major call centres, is sited in my electorate of Christchurch Central. There are some question marks still about the future of that call centre. I hope that they may be resolved, maybe with some of the Chief Executive's salary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just wanted to take a short call in regards to the Westpac New Zealand Bill and congratulate Craig Foss for bringing that forward for its first reading, and we look forward to going through the Select Committee, and his leadership on the Select Committee, I'm sure, will be invaluable as we take this bill through the committee, and we look